This is the lecture explaining the case study assignment that you will need to do. The purpose of the assignment is pretty straightforward. It's to help you gain experience in observing individuals with autism. So when you observe them for this assignment, you should be looking at the three main categories of individuals with ASD, which is behavioral, communication, and social. So you want to look at those three things and sort of see maybe the strengths and weaknesses of the child in that area, how other individuals interact with the student with ASD, and how the student with ASD interacts with them, and how the teacher interactions with the student as well. And then this assignment is also supposed to help you gain an understanding of the referral process for a student with ASD, so you might need to talk with other professionals who have evaluated the student to get an idea of their perspective. And then it's also to summarize the information that you learned from the observations, and that's what you'll be writing up. So for this assignment, you need to do 60 minutes of observation. So you can either do two 30-minute observations, 3 20-minute observations, however you want to break it up. And then you can fill out that top part with your who you are and the time you observed them. And then for the first part, you need to provide background information on the student, so their grade, gender, academic achievements or goals, any sort of background information that will be helpful for me to understand the student. You might want to look at the student's IEP to sort of get some of this information, or again, you can talk to other professionals that work with the student to sort of fill in this part. This next part, question 2, you're going to summarize information from conversations or interviews that you have with other service providers, such as speech and language therapists, social workers, physical therapy, occupational therapy. And so you're going to talk about like their perspectives on the student. And you want to try to be more objective rather than subjective. So let's say the speech teacher talks about all the things he can't do. He can't recall names, or he can't tell a story in the right order. Well, use some data. Find some data that they have to support why is it that he can't do these things. And so that way you're presenting it like more with facts rather than just saying all of the things that he can or cannot do. And also, you're also going to want to talk about some of the strengths of the student. So with each person that you talk to, try to figure out what is it that they do well. What are their strengths? That will help you kind of get a better idea of the whole picture of the student. I know sometimes we tend to focus on the negatives and everything that the student can't do and how far behind they are, but it can also be helpful to find the strengths within that student. And another good source of information is also to look at the IEP. So you can talk about maybe some of the goals and objectives that they're working on with the different support staff. You can also look at the PLAF that they write for the IEP and get some ideas of where they're currently performing and what are some things that they've worked on as well. So that would be another source of information for this question. The next question, question 3, asks you to describe the student's behavior in detail. So this is where you're going to talk about the observation. And so you want to include all domains relevant to ASD. So you're going to talk about the communication that you observed, the repetitive or challenging behaviors, and the social skills that you observed. So again, try to talk about strengths as well as weaknesses, and then try to really describe what it is that you see. So if they weren't participating in the lesson, what was it that they were doing instead? Try to really provide some explicit details as to what you saw. And make sure you address all 3 areas in order to get full credit for this part. Question 4 asks you to provide your rationale and decision for whether this student meets eligibility for ASD. So obviously, you're choosing to observe a student with ASD so they meet eligibility, but it's more about you sort of providing your own rationale as to why you think that they qualify. Or maybe you don't think that they really should qualify for the label of ASD, so you can talk about that as well. I know sometimes it can be a tricky decision, but also keep in mind that it's never an individual decision. It's often many professionals working together to come up with this decision together. And so there's a MET on D2L. This says Angel, but it's on D2L. It's from, I think it's Wayne County. And so this just talks about the eligibility for ASD in Wayne County. And so if you have your own that you have access to, you can look at that. Or you can look at the one that's on D2L so you get an idea of the criteria for students to qualify for ASD. And so then you're going to sort of provide your rationale based on this MET that's on D2L or your own, and talk about why you think the student qualifies or doesn't qualify for ASD. This next part, question 5, asks if there are any interventions being used to address the student's challenging behavior or skill deficits, and to describe any aspects of the intervention. So really you should write something for this question. Maybe they aren't using an intervention for behavior, but they're using an intervention for social skills, or maybe the social worker is doing a lunch bunch, and that's like an intervention, or maybe the student is getting some sort of academic intervention. If the student is not getting a behavioral intervention, then please talk about some other type of intervention that they are receiving, because the next 3 questions ask about interventions used. So if you just say no for all 3 of these, that's 9 points that you're not addressing. So if they don't have a behavior intervention in place, please talk about a different type of intervention. They're really, a lot of times students with ASD do have some sort of problem behavior, so there should be an intervention in place. If there's not, you can talk about a different intervention for something else that they're working on. If you're not sure what these interventions are, or you didn't observe them while you were watching the student, you talk to the teachers or support staff to figure out what it is, and then describe it for question 5. Question 6 just asks if you feel the intervention is appropriate and or effective. And so this is referring to the behavioral intervention that you talked about in question 5. And so try to use any data the teacher might have to support why the intervention is effective or maybe isn't effective. And try to provide specific examples. So maybe in your observation you saw that they were hitting other students or they weren't paying attention. You can use some of that from your observation to sort of support why you think it's effective or not effective. If you did not observe or there's not a behavioral intervention in place, again, talk about the intervention that is in place that you talked about in question 5. Question 7 asks if there is a behavioral intervention that's being used, how would you improve the intervention to better address the problem behavior? Oftentimes there's always improvements we can make to interventions that we have in place. Maybe it's that the teacher should collect data on the intervention, or maybe it's that the student isn't really responding to the intervention, there's not enough positive reinforcement in it, and that sort of thing. Maybe you think it is a great intervention, and you can talk about why you think that this intervention is fine the way it is. So just make sure that you talk about it as to either why you would improve it, or you can talk about why you think that the intervention is appropriate. Just make sure you support your claims. And if a behavioral intervention is not being used, talk about what the teacher could do to sort of improve the student's behavior. You can use your observations to help you support your claims and talk about what behaviors need to be worked on. The last part of this assignment is just a reflection. So you just need to talk about what you learned from doing this assignment and how this experience might benefit you in your future professional work. So try to go a little bit more in depth in your answer, instead of just saying, I learned a lot from this assignment, or I learned that it's important to observe students with individuals with ASD. Well, that doesn't tell me a lot about what you learned. So try to go a little bit more in depth. Talk about your experiences with observing students and talking with professionals about the student. So just try to really reflect and talk about what you learned and how you will use this in the future.